Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, welcome to a new episode of our program, The Pool of Ideas, exclusively right here on Huda TV. In this episode, inshallah, we're going to be talking about the idea of Marxism that was founded by Karl Marx. It's maybe a name that a lot of us hear of, but we may not know too much about it. And we'll find out, inshallah, what Islam has to say about this idea and what the fallacies of this idea are and how Islam is superior to it, inshallah. And we're joined in this episode, as always, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, by Dr. Mahmoud Khalifa. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me here.
Jazakallah khair. Doctor, if we can begin by defining what Marxism is, because a lot of us may hear the name and we may know a person, called Karl Marx, but we don't know what it means. Maybe we heard about it somewhere in college, or we took it in a philosophy class or something like that, but we may not know what the ideas of Karl Marx are.
To start with, Marxism is a Western philosophy that places economy at the heart of human activity. So Marxism looks at human activity from a one-sided view, that is the economy. It believes that the economy drives all human ambitions, all human activities. And the changes in the economic modes of a certain society brings about changes in the ideas and ways of life. So Marxism is basically an economic philosophy that thinks economy it comes first. It is the most important element in Marxism. Marxism doesn't really believe in anything other than the economic activities of a certain society. So it is geared towards understanding the economies of the economic development of human society, from the gathering to the modern age of capitalism.
What are some of the unique features of Marxism, and how is it exclusive from other ideas?
It is not basically exclusive from other ideas. It's exclusive in its attempt to interpret the world in revolutionary terms. It basically wants to create an egalitarian society where everybody is equal, where everybody works and everybody eats out of his work, where there's no individual ownership, there are no poor and no rich. So it wants a classless society. It wants to eliminate class differences and eliminate classes. And as such, it believes it can create an egalitarian society where no particular class takes over or oppresses other classes who are poorer.
Inshallah, a little bit later on in the episode, we're going to talk a little bit in detail about the principles of Marxism. But let's talk a little bit about history. How did this idea come about? When did it come about? And why did it come about?
Marxism came about as the outcome of the ideas of Karl Marx in the 19th century. And Karl Marx was essentially looking at the greater differences or the hardships inflicted on workers, how workers worked so hard, yet they gained very little. The gain was essentially coming with a surplus of wealth created by the hard work of the proletariat or the workers, was essentially accumulating not to the benefit of the workers themselves, but to the benefit of the owner of the factory, and as such, it made the workers grow poorer and a few people grow richer. These were the owners of the means of production.
I hear of a statement that says that 2% of people own 98% of the wealth, and 98% of the people own 2% of the wealth. Basically, if we can use that example, was Karl Marx trying to let this idea get out of hand, or was he trying to
Karl
contain
Marx
it?
was trying to create an egalitarian society where everybody works and everybody eats, where ownership is not concentrated in the hands of the 2% or the 1% of people. These people own the means of, production, and as such, a lot of money, a lot of power, capital was concentrated in their hands, and as such, it left to the other side the hard workers, the workers or the proletariat, poor and very much alienated from their work. They worked very hard, yet the fruit of their hard work was alienated from them as a result of the economic system which gave ownership to certain people who had capital and left the workers penniless.
I'm always wondering how a person sits down and writes certain ideas, whatever these ideas are or whatever his philosophy is, and then it actually gets implemented in society, and certain states adopt it and they try to implement it in their societies. And that's, of course, what happened with Karl Marx. Tell us how that happened, in what countries, and maybe was it also in the 19th century, or were his ideas implemented a little bit later down the road?
Actually, the fact that the ideas of a certain writer or a certain ideologue or a certain philosopher, the fact that these ideas get implemented is because of the seduction of ideas. Because the human quest is always for somebody who interprets or solves problems. And as such, they try one ideology after another in order, in that quest for creating a more humane society. The ideas of Marxism were essentially applied in post-1970, post-revolutionary Russia. And these were taken care of by other people who, Lenin, who came later after Marx, such as Lenin. These people put his ideas into action ruthlessly, of course, as we will come to talk about the downside of applying Marxism. So Marxism was first applied in USSR as an ideology, as a state ideology.
Has it been implemented, or there was an attempt to implement it also in some Muslim countries?
Of course, Marxism was implemented in modern Muslim countries. In Egypt, Nasser's Egypt, he tried to implement some kind of a little bit changed form of Marxism, like socialism, okay, by nationalizing the ownership, by destroying individual ownership. He took over all the factories, all the big production sites, and created and made them part of the, turned them into the ownership of the government. And as such, he tried to radically transform the ownership of the means of production by nationalizing these factories and these productive places. So as such, he tried that form of work. And that's basically one case, the biggest or the most important case of trying to apply a form of Marxism, that is socialism, was created during Nasser's life in Egypt, post-revolutionary Egypt, post-1952 Egypt.
Why is it that someone who believes in the idea of Karl Marx so often is associated with being, a disbeliever or being an atheist or something
Actually,
like that?
we can't judge Nasser or anybody who applied Marxism as a disbeliever, because we never know what they really thought about what they were doing. So we leave it to God. We were not sure about that part.
I mean, in
It's
general,
complicated.
I'm
But
not,
in
I'm not
general,
referring to
because
any specific person.
Marx himself was godless. He didn't believe in God. He was an atheist. And he essentially rejected the idea of God because he was so much affected by the philosopher Feuerbach, who essentially rejected the idea of a God. He believed that God, the more powerful God becomes, is because we as humans become weaker. We invest God, a force other than beyond us, with all the power we could have. So he was trying to seize power from God, that's atheism, and declare the death of God, as Nietzsche did during the same period.
So basically, his ideas were not all economical, were not all just about economics. They also had to do a lot with religion.
Of course, I mean, essentially, Marx said religion is the opium of the people. And he said that religion is used to make people give up their rights in their fight against the capitalists or the owners who get all the benefit, all the surplus benefit. So he essentially was against the existence of God, and he thought that religion is a justificatory ideology that justifies oppression. And his example was essentially that of Christianity, which somehow promised people a place in heaven, not a place on earth. So people would, and he said that that would, people were, the classes who owned everything, they used religion as a false consciousness in order to make people be satisfied with their poor lot and wait for a world that has in the heaven, in the hereafter, which had all the justice, all the great things of life. So he said that religion is essentially an opium that makes people give up their rights in exchange for a place in heaven.
My final question for you in this segment, in 30 seconds or less, inshallah. Does Marxism still exist today in terms of practice, or is it basically in philosophy books?
Actually, yes, that's a good question. Marxism is essentially now history, because even in its ardent defenders are now giving up on Marx and his ideas. Basically, in the USSR, Marxism or the ideas of Marx and economic theories are now changed. Capitalism is winning. In China, which is a communist country, the same idea, capitalism is gaining more ground, and all we have is just the apparatus, the garments of Marxism without Marxism.
Thank you so much. My dear brothers and sisters, we're going to take a short break, inshallah. When we come back, we're going to begin talking in depth about some of the principles of the ideology of Marxism. And before we take a break, if you're just joining us right now, the point of what we're doing here, my dear brothers and sisters, is obviously not to promote these false ideas, but actually to show their fallacies and to show how Islam is superior to all of them. But before we do that, we have to understand what these philosophers stood for, what these ideas are, and how their ideas came about. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, welcome back to the Pool of Ideas. As we're continuing here in this episode, inshallah, we're talking about the ideas of Karl Marx. And in this segment, inshallah, we want to talk a little bit in depth about some of the principles of Marxism, inshallah. Dr. Mahmoud Khalifa, welcome back.
Well, thank you.
One of the main ideas that I got from what you were talking about earlier in the first segment was the idea that Karl Marx believed that the state, meaning the government, essentially, should have control of all property. Why did he choose the state to be the guardian of wealth in society? Why didn't, for example, he choose a religious institution, for example, the church at that time, or, for example, maybe a council of representatives or an NGO or something like that?
The main reason is Marxism is a romantic philosophy. It talks about an impossible society. You can't make people equal in terms of having the same rights and the same responsibilities, because people will essentially differ because of talents. There will be talented people who could do certain things which people need. There will be other people who are not talented, and then they will not get the status other reach. So it is because human society is made up of disparate talents, different people, different ideas. And as such, to think of society as a romantic society that has no classes, no evils, it's very romantic, and as such is not applicable. So people will always want to read about utopias. And Marxism is an economic utopia where everybody's economically equal, okay? And that's the attraction. You want to live in a utopia where everybody is equal economically. And that's part of its attraction.
What else makes the ideas of Karl Marx unique? What are some of the other principles that are unique to
Basically,
his philosophy?
Marxism comes up with a very new idea. Marx claimed that it is not ideas that tend to change the world, it's economy. It is the change in tools of production creates a change in how people think. And that's a new idea. While it is always said that Marx turned Hegel's idealism upside down, because Hegel believed that in a dialectic of ideas, the human history moves in a dialectic of ideas, where you have a thesis, an antithesis, and then these two opposing ideas form a new thesis, or what we call a synthesis. So human society developed through the contradiction in ideas and how these ideas form together to create new ideas. But Marx said this is not the way. It is the change in the economic way, the material world that creates or gives rise to certain ideas, which is contradictory, because Marx himself, the way he thought about economy, changed the world, and his were just ideas. So this is one contradiction of Marxism that puts economy first.
Karl Marx and his view of religion in general, why was he so pessimistic about religion, and why did he think of it so negatively?
I think he might have been very justified in talking about religion as an opium of the people. But you put the word religion between inverted commas, because Marx didn't mean any religion. What Marx had at the back of his mind while talking about religion is Christianity. And Christianity at his time was part and parcel of the rich class which oppressed the poor. So Christianity, or let us not say Christianity, the body of the church at the time was very corrupt, and it was part of the way of controlling the masses against revolutions, against the injustices. And that's the biggest difference between Christianity and Islam. Islam doesn't condone injustice in exchange for a promise of paradise or a better life in the hereafter. Islam instructs you to revolt against injustice, economic, political, whatsoever. And as such, maybe had Marx had any chance of getting into contact with Islam, he might have been very more specific when he talked about religion as opium of the people. Excellent. He might have said Christianity is, or the church is the opium of the people. So he essentially regarded correctly religion, defined as church, to be part of the oppressive regimes that assisted the rich classes in controlling poor people or the working class. But Islam, on the other side, the idea of religion, according to Marx, doesn't apply to Islam because Islam has a very revolutionary tenor that would, for example, if you remember Abu Huraira when he said that I don't know why anybody who doesn't find food in his house would not just go into the streets raising his sword against the people who are taking over his money. So this revolutionary tenor of demanding economic justice and equality is part of Islam, and as such, Marx's definition of religion as opium of the people is correct insofar as he's talking about the specific context of his ideas, but it doesn't apply to Islam.
Jazakallah khair. And I think that's a great way to end this part one of our discussion about Marxism. And inshallah, in the next episode, we're going to go in detail and we're going to compare and contrast Islam and Marxism, Islam versus Marxism, inshallah. My dear brothers and sisters, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, coming up in the next episode of the Pool of Ideas, inshallah, we're going to go deeper and we're going to compare and contrast the truth of Islam versus the fallacies of Marxism. We'll see you then, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.